Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I truly appreciate the work that you all do to grow and protect the urban and community forests. So my speech is really about the power of story. And I grew up in rural places. I grew up in the backwoods of northern Idaho in a single wide trailer across from the third tallest dam in the United States. That was literally right next to where I grew up. And my dad worked for Fish and Wildlife. He was a part-time fish feeder, and then later he was a mechanic. And he used to wake me up super early in the morning before dawn broke. And he would hold my hand as we walked past the dam. And then we would trail down a little rural highway to a fish hatchery where I was allowed to throw the fish pellets at the growing fish, which were called fry. And I would toss the pellets in the air and little silver fish would jump. And it just felt like I was coordinating magic. And then we would walk back in the cold light of morning and we would arrive to my mom cooking breakfast and the rest of our day would begin. I would play in the woods with my friends. We would make forts. There were hunters and fishermen everywhere. And the women were mostly homesteading. It was a very different reality. I grew up with the cleanest of air, the smell of pine needles under my feet, and everywhere I would look, there would be bright green leaves and ferns that were just reaching for sunlight. So much like you, I can't imagine a world without trees or soil or fresh air. And we're fortunate. We have that kinship with nature and with the earth and with outdoor spaces, while we also live in cities and communities. My earliest days haven't been what my adulthood has become, which is concrete and traffic, smog, crowds of people, maybe not so much these days. But honestly, my backstory is so much about nature and about playing the role of being like a tiny magician to those fish at the fish hatchery. It was like lighting up little mini fireworks when they would jump for the food. Being in nature, right? Or doing servant leadership, volunteering, planting trees. It's so much about being in connection with something bigger than we are. So now I live in California like you, but it's those past experiences that really shape what I care about and what I know to be true. And when we deeply care about something, when we come to know it well enough to understand the complexity of it, not just the greatness of it, right? The whole entire beast of it, we often become passionate about it, and then we will steward it. And we'll do it because we're human. Humans, we're biologically wired with 3 unique gifts. And it's my call to action for us to embrace those gifts and to leverage them to do and accomplish amazing things. So as humans, we're born with something called optimistic bias. That's our natural condition that allows us to envision what we hope to be and see and feel within ourselves and others and the world. It's our optimistic bias that creates an internal drive and desire to improve things not only for ourselves, but for the people and the communities that we surround ourselves with. We also have the power of metacognition. That's the ability to think about thinking. It helps us gain insight into who we are and why we behave the way that we do. The lion, right? He rarely thinks about why he roars or attacks. It's instinctual. Humans have the gift of metacognition where we get to think about ourselves and our behaviors and our actions. We can have deep self-awareness and self-control. And then the third gift that we're born with is narrative communication. That's our ability and our creativity to express our thoughts and our feelings by using language or symbols to create meaning and evidence for why we do what we do and why others do what they do. There's a Jewish proverb that says, words create worlds. Words create worlds. And so stories, the stories that we share and tell, they shape our sense of reality and they inform our decision-making. So this morning, I wish that I were speaking to you under the gorgeous lush canopy of trees in Camp Pollock with that beautiful sunshine filtering through. And we would share stories about why our work matters and why we work so hard. We would tell stories about how we came to belong to our work, our backstories and how they've shaped our understanding and our desire to walk this path. We would tell stories of impact. We would look at stories that the data and the numbers tell us. And we would hear about all the ways that our neighborhoods and our parks and our cities are changing because of the work that we do. At the end of the day, all stories are really about change. Even when nothing changes, it's about change. And that's why you're here, right? You're part of the California Relief Network because you want to create change. You want to change our environment, our quality of life, our communities. So every day we enact that gift of optimistic bias because we're hopeful that we will succeed, even when the resources are tight, even when the funding might not come through, even when the volunteers don't show up. We still have hope. We also engage in that gift of metacognition. You know, every time that we write a strategic plan, we write a list about what we need to do with the world outside of our organizational doors. We're thinking about how to create a new story. We're asking people to think differently, to be mindful of their impact on the planet, and how to incorporate new ideas into their current lifestyle. And every day we swim in a multiplicity of stories. We have the news, we have television, media, music, books. We have the stories that we swap at the water cooler, or now Zoom, over text, over telephone. Stories shape our reality, and they're the single most effective way to create real change because it's how we change our mind. It's how we connect our experience to other ways of being and doing in the world. If you want someone to change a habit, learn a new trick, or belong to your cause, it's a continuous game of show and tell. Show them something worth caring about, tell them a story that illustrates why, and you do it again and again and again and again. Stories really do shape our reality. So I want to deepen into that third unique human gift, the narrative communication, right? We're biologically wired to understand the world through language, and that all comes from our experiences. A story-based world, it's inescapable. I think about the story that Chad told about climbing trees and the girl who rang the bell and then asked him that she wanted to climb to space. Her experience opened herself up to a new story, into what she could become. That's just so amazing. So I want to shift now to a little bit of basic neuroscience. So we have our brain and we have our mind, and the two work together in tandem. The brain is the machine, and it's like the hardware. And the mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our decisions, that's the software. So they work constantly to create meaning and to judge our outer world. So when we go to sleep, it's the limbic part of our brain that continues to work all night, filing away the experiences of the day. And at the same time, our mind is processing those experiences to fit into an ongoing story that we're constantly telling ourselves about who we are, what we can achieve, and how the world works. So I want you to think of having an internal filing cabinet in your mind. The brain creates the file, and the mind creates the label for the file. So when we come across something like a piece of information, data, science, maybe a person that you've never met before, a story or an idea, if we don't have in our filing cabinet the reference or the file for it, our brain and mind struggle to embrace it because they simply don't know where it goes. They haven't had those experiences, or maybe they've had negative experiences. So they have a negative file in their mind about being outdoors, caring about the environment. So it all comes down to the stories that we interact with and we share. They inform our sense of reality. Words build worlds. They ultimately do shape how and why we care. So my dad wasn't happy when I moved to California. Why would I choose to go to a place with all that traffic, with all those people? And how could I breathe that stuffy air? Wouldn't I miss the woods and the quiet nights where the frogs and the crickets croak and chirp me to sleep? Wouldn't I miss my fish? I mean, this wasn't how I was raised. I went against my dad's sense of reality. I stepped out of a story that we had belonged inside together. California, of course, would change me, just as adult and growing does. But I still carry with me the values of caring about nature and the gifts that it brings. My story and sense of reality is utterly inseparable from how I access and understand and be in the world. So, how many of you have met someone who simply didn't believe or struggled to understand your point of view? This is someone that you couldn't engage in your cause. You couldn't convince them for funding or for resources, or they simply seemed uninterested entirely. Have you ever met someone who just wouldn't listen to science, to facts, to data? They simply can't hear the story you want to tell them. It's so harsh, right? And it hurts because we work so incredibly hard to rally and share our impact, and then it falls flat. So, as someone who's spent the last 20 years rallying people around causes that I'm really passionate about, I remind myself that when I can't make a connection with someone or something, they simply don't have the file in their mind yet about what I'm trying to tell them. They don't have the same backstory as me, or they haven't had the same story experiences. Their sense of reality is entirely different than mine. So they're struggling somehow, and we can be a bridge for them. We have to keep telling stories. It's continuous work, and we just don't tell enough of them about transformation, about impact. We give up too soon. We fear that we're hounding people, we're bothering them, we're asking them for too much and too often. We worry about donor fatigue and volunteer fatigue. I can tell you it's simply not true. We don't share enough stories about our work and our impact, our passion, and why we care. So we have to keep crafting stories and sharing them. And there's so many different ways to share even a singular story. And anyone can do it. There's usually one person in your organization or on your team who's like the chief storyteller, the person who does the marketing, the person who writes the newsletters, right? All of us can do this though. We should all be the chief storytellers. We have those three gifts to leverage: optimistic bias, which is hope. 2, metacognition, to have self-awareness, to think deeply about the stories that we cling to, the stories that we share, and the stories that we can use to help change the minds of others and hopefully impact their behavior and habits. And then, of course, we have language and symbols. So it all begins with you, right? How will you write a new chapter for the environment, for a community? I need you to keep sharing stories, stories of transformation and of change, and also stories of what happens if we don't change. We know that that is critical. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and keep on telling stories.